Mila walked slowly through the busy city plaza, her small shoes scraping against the cold pavement. The streets were loud with voices, engines, laughter, and footsteps, but her world was quiet. Inside her coat pocket, she carried only two things, a small piece of stale bread and hope. The bread was not enough to fill even half her stomach, and the hope, though thin, was the only thing keeping her standing. Her violin case hung from her shoulder, old and scratched, too big for her little body. It had belonged to her mother, and even though many people told her it was useless, Mila held it like treasure. She hadn't eaten a proper meal in 2 days, and her legs felt weak, but her hands did not let go of the violin. It was the last memory she had of warmth, love, music, and home. She walked past shiny restaurants with glass windows and golden lighting. Inside, people smiled while eating large plates of steaming food, soup, roasted bread, vegetables, meat. Mila's mouth watered, but she forced herself to look away. She wasn't here to cry, she was here to survive. She approached a table outside a cafe and stood there quietly until a man noticed her. "Yes?" he asked, slightly annoyed. Mila took a breath, her voice small but steady. "Sir, may I perform the violin for food?" The man frowned, his friends laughed as if her words were a joke. "What are you, a street musician?" one said. "Aren't you too little to play anything?" Another chuckled. Mila felt her cheeks burn, but she didn't run. She tightened her grip on the violin case. Her stomach growled loudly, loud enough that even she heard it. The men noticed and laughed harder. She walked away silently, heart heavy but not broken, not yet. She moved to another corner of the plaza where a bakery smell filled the air, warm bread, fresh cakes, sugar. Her hands shook, not from cold but from hunger. She stepped toward the shop window, her eyes glued to a golden croissant inside. She could almost taste the sweetness. A young woman exiting the bakery saw her staring. "Go home, child," she said gently but with pity. Mila swallowed and gathered courage again. "I could play a song," she whispered, "just for some food." The woman hesitated only for a second, then shook her head and walked away. Mila watched her leave, carrying a bag full of bread enough to feed her family. Mila only needed one piece. People crowded the plaza with shopping bags, phones, expensive coats. Nobody noticed how pale Mila's face had become. Nobody saw the strength behind her fragile posture. To the world, she looked like a lost little girl, but she wasn't lost. She was trying. Hours passed. Mila repeated her question to strangers. Some ignored her, some smiled politely, some laughed. Each rejection felt like a small stone placed on her chest. It grew heavier with every minute. Her feet hurt. Her fingers were numb from cold. Her hunger became a sharp pain. She sat on a bench to rest, placing the violin next to her. Her eyes lifted to the sky. It was late afternoon now, orange light painting the clouds. Beautiful but empty. She wondered if her mother could see her from somewhere. She wondered if music still mattered in a world that walked past hungry children without pausing. She touched the violin gently, brushing dust from its wooden surface. The strings needed tuning. The bow was old. But she knew that when she played, something inside her woke up, something strong, something alive. She stood again, shakier than before, and walked into the center of the plaza. She opened the violin case slowly. People turned to look, not with interest but confusion. A child with a violin, alone, it seemed strange, it seemed unreal. Mila lifted the violin to her chin. She didn't ask anyone this time, she didn't speak. She simply prepared to play. But before she could draw the bow across the strings, a sudden voice stopped her. A man in a white traditional robe stood nearby, watching her carefully, calmly. His expression wasn't cold or amused. He looked curious, truly curious. Mila froze, unsure whether to continue or lower her violin. She didn't know who he was, but something about his stillness felt different from the others. His presence was quiet but powerful. He didn't laugh, he didn't walk away, he just watched. And in that moment something changed, like the air itself paused, waiting for whatever happened next. Mila's fingers trembled, not from fear but from possibility. Her story was about to shift. She could feel it, even if she didn't yet understand how. The hungry girl in the streets was standing at the doorway of fate, and one note of music could open it. The plaza grew louder as evening approached. Streetlights flickered awake one by one, casting long shadows across the ground. Mila stood there with her violin still lifted, but she hadn't yet played. The man in the white robe continued watching her, silent like a gentle question the world had not answered yet. She didn't know what he wanted. She didn't know if he would laugh like the others. But she hoped quietly that he might listen. Before she could play, a group of teenagers walked by. They noticed her small figure standing with a violin, and their laughter began like a spark. One boy pointed. "Look at her, is she trying to be a musician?" Another added loudly, "Maybe she thinks she can buy pizza with a song." The group laughed harder, loud enough for people around to turn. Mila felt her throat tighten. Her fingers trembled, bow slipping slightly. Her heart felt like a fragile glass that someone just cracked. But she did not put her violin down. She pressed her chin to the wooden rest and took a shaky breath. "Please," she whispered, though nobody heard, "just one chance." The teenagers gathered, expecting a joke, not music. One girl crossed her arms and said, "Fine, play, let's see what happens." Mila raised her bow, but before she could draw the first note, a man selling roasted chestnuts shouted from behind his cart, "Hey, little one. No one has time for that nonsense, go home." A few customers chuckled, others glanced in pity, but no one stepped forward to help her. Mila's cheeks flushed pink from humiliation. She lowered her violin slowly, ashamed. She didn't cry not because she wasn't hurt, but because she had cried too many times already. The man in white watched everything. His eyes narrowed slightly, not with anger but with understanding. There was something about this child that rooted him in place, something that refused to break even under laughter. Mila stepped aside, walked toward a quieter corner, and sat down near a fountain. Water splashed rhythmically beside her, each drop sounding like a reminder of how hungry she was. Her stomach growled again, louder this time. She wrapped her arms around herself and stared at her violin. It was not valuable, not new, not shining like the instruments she once saw in music schools through glass windows, but it was hers, and in her heart it was powerful. She remembered her mother's voice, soft, tired, but full of love. When the world closes its eyes, music forces them open. Mila breathed deeply. She wiped her face with the back of her sleeve. She stood again. The plaza was still full, people eating, walking, laughing, living. They hadn't changed. But Mila had. This time she didn't ask for permission. This time she didn't beg. She walked to the center of the crowd and placed her violin beneath her chin once more. She closed her eyes, not to escape, but to gather strength. She didn't feel hungry at that moment. She didn't feel cold. She only felt music waiting behind her fingertips like a bird ready to fly. Then she began to play. At first, only a few people noticed the sound, soft, trembling like a whisper in the wind. But with every passing second, the melody grew clearer. A gentle tune, delicate like falling snow. Her bow moved carefully but beautifully across the strings, producing notes that shimmered through the air. A woman walking past slowed her steps. A child tugged on his mother's sleeve to listen. Even the chestnut seller paused for a heartbeat. The teenagers stopped laughing. The girl with folded arms lowered them slowly. One of the boys took out his phone to record. The music was fragile but real, too real to ignore. The man in white stood completely still, his eyes softening as if something deep inside him recognized the sound. It wasn't perfection he heard, it was emotion, hunger, hope, memory. And the plaza, noisy, loud, careless, began to quiet down. Mila continued playing, unaware of how many people were watching now. She poured every ache inside her into the strings, the days she starved, the nights she slept on cold floors, the dreams she lost but never let die. Somebody whispered, "She's good." Another replied, "She's more than good." People began to form a circle around her slowly, like drawn by gravity. The laughter that once followed her turned into silence, into attention, into respect. Mila didn't open her eyes. Tears rolled down her cheeks, not from pain, but from release, like her soul finally had space to breathe. The man in white finally stepped forward through the crowd. His presence was calm, steady, like a lighthouse guiding a fragile boat toward safety. He waited until she finished her piece, the last note trembling in the cool evening air like a candle flame. Then, in a voice gentle yet powerful enough to reach every ear around, he said, "You played with your heart." Mila gasped softly and looked up. Her eyes were wet, her face tired, but the spark inside her, the one everyone ignored, now glowed. The people who laughed had nothing to say. They just stared, stunned. Something unexplainable had just happened, something the city would remember. And the hungry violinist who came seeking food had given them something far greater. She had given them music. People continued staring at Mila as though she were something unreal, a little girl who had just melted the noise of an entire plaza into silence. Her violin trembled in her small hands, and she blinked rapidly, not sure if she should bow, speak, or run. Moments like this weren't normal in her life. She was used to being unseen, ignored like a shadow on the street. But now dozens of eyes were fixed on her. One pair stood out more than the rest. The man in the white robe stepped forward slowly, his footsteps calm and confident. He didn't smile at first, he didn't clap loudly, he just looked at her with a quiet focus that made Mila feel like she mattered. "Really mattered? What is your name, little one?" he finally asked. Her voice was soft. "Mila." He nodded gently, tasting the name like a note in a melody. "Mila," he repeated, "how long have you played the violin?" She thought about it. Her memory traveled back to her mother's hands guiding hers, to tiny fingers learning to hold a bow, to nights lit by a single flickering candle. "Since I was 4, she answered. "My mother taught me." What? A murmur rippled through the crowd, surprise, disbelief. She was only 9 now. 5 years of learning on an old violin with no teacher, no academy, no books. The teenagers who had laughed earlier lowered their heads slightly, shame whispering in their ears. The man in white knelt down to her level, his clothing falling in soft folds around him. His eyes were warm but serious. "Mila," he said, "play another piece." She hesitated, exhausted and hungry. Her stomach ached like a hollow drum. "I'm tired," she whispered honestly, "and I haven't eaten." The man's expression shifted. A flicker of pain crossed his eyes, the kind only those with empathy feel. He reached into a paper bag someone had handed him earlier and pulled out a fresh sandwich, still warm, still smelling like hope. He held it out to her. Mila stared at it, bread, meat, vegetables. A real meal. Her throat tightened. She wanted to grab it desperately, but she stepped back instead. "I should play first," she said shyly. "I don't want to take food for free." The entire plaza felt that sentence. It hit hearts like a soft thunder. Honor, pride, self-worth. Even in hunger, she respected her music. The man's jaw tightened, not with anger, but with admiration. "You will eat," he said softly. "But first, play what you feel, not for me, for yourself." Mila's eyes glistened. She lifted her violin once more, slower this time, as if picking up something sacred. She closed her eyes, not to hide from the world, but to open a door inside herself. Then she played. This time the music came not like snow, but like fire. It was faster, sharper, deeper. The notes danced like wind racing through mountains. Her bow moved like lightning, confident and wild, no hesitation left inside her. People gasped, unable to believe a starving child could produce such sound. Phones were raised, recordings began, the world around her watched wide-eyed. The man in white didn't blink, he didn't move. He listened like someone hearing truth for the first time. When she reached the end, she held the final note long, like she wanted time to pause with her, to breathe with her. And when she stopped, the silence that followed was heavier, deeper, more powerful than before. The plaza erupted into applause, loud, sincere, unstoppable. The teenagers who mocked her clapped the hardest, guilt written across their faces. A restaurant owner came forward with a plate of food. A woman offered a coat. A fruit seller placed apples in her violin case. Kindness spread like light from a cracked door, sudden, warm, surprising. But Mila's gaze searched only for one face, the man in white. He stepped closer, placing the warm sandwich into her hands gently. "Now eat," he said. "You have earned it." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she took the first bite, soft bread, warm filling, a flavor she almost forgot existed. The crowd watched her eat in silent respect, no one rushing, no one laughing. After a few moments the man spoke again, but this time his voice felt heavier, like a decision already made. "You should not be playing in streets," he said. "You belong on a stage." Mila froze mid-bite. On a stage, a real one. She had dreamed of it alone at night, but hearing someone else say it, someone who saw her, believed in her, felt unreal. He continued, "If you allow me, I would like to test your skill further. Not here, somewhere you can be heard." The plaza held its breath. Mila's heart pounded like drums inside her chest. A test, a chance, a door opening that she'd stood outside her whole life. She nodded slowly. "I will go," she said. "I will play." The man smiled, small, proud, full of promise. And that is how a hungry girl with a violin stepped from the street into destiny, not with force but with music. Tomorrow her life would change. Tonight it had already begun. The next morning came with pale sunlight and trembling hope. Mila woke up on a small bench near the fountain where she slept the previous night. Her stomach still felt empty, but not as empty as before. She had eaten because she played. She had been seen, remembered, and one man, a stranger, had opened a door she never knew existed. As she lifted her violin case, she saw him again, standing near the fountain waiting. His white robe moved softly in the morning breeze, and his eyes carried the same calm attention as the night before, the attention no one else ever gave her. "You came," Mila whispered. "I promised," he replied. She walked to him, her steps small but sure. For the first time she felt like she wasn't walking alone. He introduced himself with gentle clarity. "My name is Rashid." Mila repeated the name, uncertain if she should bow, thank him, or stand still. Rashid gestured toward a black car parked near the plaza, sleek, shining, elegant like a quiet piece of luxury. "I want to take you somewhere," he said, "somewhere your music will be heard without laughter." Mila hesitated for only a moment, not from fear but from disbelief. Then she nodded. Rashid opened the car door for her with respect, not pity. She stepped inside slowly, clutching her violin to her chest. The city roads blurred past the window as they drove, tall buildings, rushing people, bright advertisements, all buzzing with noise that no longer reached her. Mila sat speechless, staring at her reflection in the glass, a small girl, pale but glowing with a strange new light. Rashid glanced at her. "Are you nervous?" he asked. "A little," she admitted, "but also excited." He smiled. "Good. Nerves mean your heart is alive." Soon the car stopped in front of a grand building, tall white pillars, red carpet steps, shining glass doors, and a banner above that read, "Alinoor Music Hall auditions today." Mila froze. "Auditions?" Her voice cracked like fragile glass. Rashid nodded. "A hall for musicians, professionals, students, dreamers. You will play there." Mila's breath shook. She had only performed in the streets, no ceiling, no stage, no audience trained to hear perfection. What if she failed? What if they laughed just like the plaza did? She looked down at her violin. It was old, scratched, worn. Rashid noticed her worry and spoke softly. A violin is not judged by its wood. A musician is judged by her soul. His words steadied her. She walked up the steps slowly, as though each one was a battle her legs needed to fight. Inside, the hall took her breath away. Velvet seats in hundreds of rows, a stage that glowed under golden lights, a piano standing like royalty, and a microphone waiting. Dozens of musicians filled the lobby, violinists with glossy instruments, pianists with confident eyes, singers warming their voices. They wore clean clothes and carried expensive cases. Mila's coat looked dull beside them. Some turned and stared. A girl whispered, "Where is she from?" Another smirked, "Probably lost." What? Mila lowered her gaze, but Rashid placed a hand lightly on her shoulder, a silent reminder, "Stand tall." Soon, a judge called out from the stage, "Next performer, Mila." Her heart jumped. It was time. Rashid walked her to the stage doors but did not step beyond them. He simply said, "Go, show them what the streets already know." Mila inhaled deeply. She stepped onto the stage. At first, the hall seemed too big, too bright, too loud in its silence. Judges stared down from a long table, expecting ordinary talent, maybe even disappointment. Musicians in the back rows glanced with raised eyebrows, whispering. She placed her violin beneath her chin. Someone in the audience laughed softly. "Look, the street girl." A judge sighed, ready to dismiss her. But Mila closed her eyes, not to hide but to remember. She remembered hunger, cold nights, her mother's soft voice. Music learned not from books but from pain and love. Then she played. The first note rang out like a bell, pure, trembling, tender. The hall fell instantly still. Judges leaned forward. Musicians stopped whispering. Something powerful flowed from her bow, something raw, untamed, heart-deep. Her second note was stronger. Her third, brighter. Soon her violin was no longer an instrument, it was her voice. Her past, her hunger, her dream. The music rose and fell like waves, gentle then fierce, soft then thunderous. Every sound painted the struggle of a child fighting the world with nothing but music. The hall listened. No laughter remained. Only awe. Tears filled one judge's eyes. Another lowered his pen, unable to write anything but admiration. Even the young musicians who once smirked now stared with open mouths. Mila's final note hovered in the room like a star suspended in night. When silence returned, it was not empty, it was sacred. Nobody moved, nobody breathed. Then applause shattered the stillness, loud, rising, unstoppable. People stood, judges clapped, some wiped their eyes. Mila stood frozen, bow shaking in her hand, tears rolling silently down her cheeks. She had not just played. She had conquered. And somewhere in the back of the hall, Rashid watched, eyes proud, heart full, knowing this was only the beginning. The applause echoed through the hall like thunder rolling across mountains. Mila stood frozen on stage, her violin bow still raised slightly, her chest rising and falling with sharp breaths. She had never heard such applause, not once in her life. It felt unreal, like she was watching someone else live the moment she always dreamed of. One of the judges, an older man with silver hair and glasses, stood up slowly. His eyes glistened in the warm stage lights. He took a deep breath, then spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. That was not just talent, that was a soul speaking through strings. The audience murmured, stunned by such praise. Mila's lips parted, but no sound came out. She stared at the judge as if trying to confirm whether she actually heard him or imagined it. Another judge, a woman in an elegant blue dress, leaned closer to the microphone. "Where did you learn to play like that?" she asked, voice soft with disbelief. Mila swallowed, hands shaking slightly. "My mother taught me," she said, "at home before she passed away." A quiet wave of sympathy spread through the hall. The judges exchanged looks not of pity but admiration. Mila's music wasn't trained, polished, or shaped by strict teachers. It was born from love and hardship. The woman judge's voice trembled just slightly. "And you have never been to music school?" Mila shook her head. "No, ma'am, I couldn't afford it." Silence fell again, the kind that carries weight. Finally, the head judge leaned forward, emotion shining in his eyes. "Mila," he said slowly, "you are not just a violinist, you are a gift." Her breath caught. "You don't belong on streets, you belong on stages." Mila felt her heart swell so fast she could barely stand still. Her knees weakened, but she held herself upright as though invisible hands kept her steady. Then, in a moment that changed everything, the head judge lifted a golden envelope from the table. Inside was an offer she never expected. "We would like to award you a full scholarship to the International Academy of Music," he announced. "Your tuition, meals, instruments, everything will be taken care of." Gasps filled the hall, Mila's vision blurred with tears. Her fingers slipped from the violin slightly, not from weakness but from overwhelming disbelief. A scholarship, food, a school, a future. After years of hunger, shame, and cold nights, a door had opened wider than any she imagined. The audience erupted into applause again, louder than before. Some people stood, some cried, Some recorded the moment on their phones, knowing they were witnessing the birth of someone extraordinary. Mila looked toward the back of the hall, searching. Her eyes found Rashid. He stood proudly, arms crossed gently, eyes reflecting warmth like sunlight after rain. Their gazes met, and Mila felt something inside her settle, like a small bird realizing it finally had wings. She stepped off the stage slowly, the scholarship letter pressed to her chest like a heartbeat. Judges shook her hand, musicians congratulated her, and strangers offered small gifts, fruit, pastries, warm scarves. She accepted everything with trembling hands and tear-soaked gratitude. When she reached Rashid, she stopped, unsure what to say. Words felt too small for what he had given her. He knelt slightly to meet her eye level, his voice calm yet full of emotion. "You played with hunger yesterday," he said. "Today you played with hope." Mila laughed through tears, a sound fragile yet bright. "You believed in me," she whispered. Rashid shook his head gently. "No," he said, "you made me believe." Mila threw her arms around him suddenly, a hug full of gratitude, fear, excitement, love, and relief. Rashid stiffened for a moment, surprised, then softened and placed a gentle hand on her back. After a long, quiet moment, he said, "Your journey has just begun, but I will walk with you until you need me no more." Mila pulled away and looked up with new strength in her eyes. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving, she was rising. And thousands of strangers across the world would soon know her name, not as a hungry girl asking to perform for food, but as the genius who turned streets into symphonies. Her future was no longer a distant hope, it was here. Her future was no longer a distant hope, it was here. No headings, only pure story. Mila's first day at the International Academy of Music felt like walking into another world. The building was enormous, polished floors, echoing hallways, grand staircases, rooms where sound floated like magic. Students in pressed uniforms moved with confidence, carrying shiny instruments and speaking in musical terms Mila didn't even recognize. Her old violin case looked small here. Her shoes squeaked softly, and her coat seemed too faded for a place like this. But she held her scholarship letter in one hand and her violin in the other, and that was enough to keep her walking. Rashid stood beside her, guiding her through the halls like someone who wanted her to feel safe. She felt less alone knowing he was there. When they reached Classroom B, Violin Division, Mila paused at the door. Behind it she heard music, smooth, fast, perfect, the kind she had only ever imagined. Rashid placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Remember," he said quietly, "you are here because your heart plays what others cannot." She nodded, inhaled deeply, and pushed open the door. Inside, about 20 students turned to look at her. Some eyes were curious, some cold, some merely uninterested. Their violins were new, polished, expensive. Mila's looked like it had survived a war. A tall girl in a blue ribbon whispered loudly enough for others to hear, "Street girl finally arrived." A few laughed under their breath. Mila lowered her gaze, but she did not break. She walked to the last empty seat in the back row and sat quietly. The instructor, a strict woman with silver hair tied neatly in a bun, began the lesson without comment, though her eyes lingered on Mila with unreadable curiosity. When the class began their practice piece, Mila listened carefully. Their technique was perfect, synchronized like soldiers, but there was something missing. She felt it the way one feels cold in a room with no fire. Where was emotion? Where was pain? Joy's story? Her bow hand twitched, wanting to show them. Halfway through the lesson, the instructor turned to Mila. "You are new," she said. "Stand, show us how you play." The room hushed, whispers rippled like wind. "She'll fail. She only plays for food. This will be entertaining." Mila stood slowly, her legs trembled, but she kept her head up. Rashid's promise lived inside her like a flame. She lifted the violin, hand steady. She breathed once. Then she played, not a perfect scale, not a practiced piece. She played what her heart remembered, the street hunger, cold nights, her mother's lullaby. The notes wavered at first, then found strength, rising like wings. Students stared, stunned. The instructor's eyes softened, not with pity but with surprise. The room changed. Music poured out of her like water breaking through a dam. Some students blinked rapidly, unsure how to process sound that wasn't polished but alive. One boy put down his violin slowly, as if realizing his own music was missing something hers carried. Emotion. When she finished, silence held the room like a closed fist. The instructor exhaled, long and slow. "You play with pain," she said quietly, "and pain is powerful, but you must learn control." Mila nodded. She understood, heart she had. Now she needed skill. The rest of the week was not easy. Mila practiced until her fingers ached. She learned notes she never knew existed. She stayed after class daily, repeating scales slowly, carefully, patiently. The other students often walked past without speaking. Some sneered, some glared. One girl pushed her shoulder once in the hallway, whispering, "You don't belong here." But Mila didn't answer with words. She answered with music. Every night she stayed in the practice room long after others left. The window reflected her small figure, tired face, determined eyes. Hunger still lived in her memory, and that hunger became her fuel. One night, when her bow slipped from exhaustion and fell to the floor, she sank to her knees, shaking. Tears threatened, memories stung, doubt whispered, maybe they're right, maybe I don't belong here. Just then, a familiar voice. You're still here. Rashid stood in the doorway, watching her with gentle pride. He stepped inside, picked up her bow, and placed it in her hands again. You belong more than any of them, he said softly, because you fight for every note. Mila looked up, eyes filled with exhaustion but also fire. I want to be good, she whispered. I want to be better. Rashid smiled, not wide but warm and steady. You will, he said. And one day this academy will not ask if you belong, they will wish they had believed sooner. What? Mila rose slowly, pain in her fingers, strength in her soul. Tomorrow she would play again, not to prove others wrong, but to prove herself right. And as Rashid turned off the lights, leaving only the soft glow from the window, Mila knew something with certainty. Her journey was no longer about food. It was about destiny. No headings, just pure flowing story. Weeks turned into months inside the academy, and Mila changed in ways no one expected, not even herself. Her technique sharpened, her posture straightened, her fingers learned speed and precision. But unlike the others, she never lost what made her different. She still played with heart, sometimes soft like memory, sometimes fierce like survival. Always real, her teachers began to notice. One afternoon during a sight reading test, the strict instructor who once doubted her paused mid-lecture and said quietly, "This child plays with a story." Those words spread. Soon, Mila was no longer just the street girl with a violin. She became someone people whispered about in hallways, not with pity but with curiosity. Still, not everyone celebrated her growth. Some students felt threatened. They came from wealthy families, trained for years with private tutors, believing talent belonged only to those who paid for it. Mila broke that belief without trying, and jealousy grew like weeds. The girl with the blue ribbon, Clara, watched Mila rise with silent resentment. She is nothing, Clara hissed to her friends one day, just emotional noise. But the teachers thought differently. During mid-year evaluation, Mila earned one of the highest scores in her division. When the results were posted, whispers filled the hallway like storm winds. How did she pass us? She didn't even read music last year. What? She's a miracle or a threat. Mila felt the mixture around her, admiration like sunlight, jealousy like shadows. Both followed her everywhere. One evening, after a long practice session, Mila was packing her violin when she overheard two instructors speaking near the doorway. She must perform at the Grand Winter Concert, one said. She might outshine trained soloists, the other replied softly, not with fear but excitement. Mila froze. The Grand Winter Concert was not a normal performance. It was the Academy's most prestigious event, attended by musicians, critics, wealthy patrons, orchestra conductors. One performance there could launch a career. She pressed her hand to her chest, heart hammering against her ribs. Was this real? Was she truly being considered? The next morning confirmed everything. Her instructor entered with an official document and called her name. Mila, she said, voice firm but proud, you are selected to perform at the winter concert. What? The classroom erupted, some shocked, some impressed, some furious. Clara stood so quickly her chair scraped the floor. That is unfair, she snapped. I trained for years, she just showed up from the streets. Her voice cracked with anger. She doesn't deserve it. The room became ice. Mila lowered her eyes but didn't break. Rashid's voice lived inside her memory. You fight for every note. The instructor responded calmly. Mila earned her place by talent, not by comfort. No argument could erase that truth. That night, Mila practiced until her fingers burned. She rehearsed every passage, every shift, every breath between notes. She didn't just want to perform, she wanted to transform. But Clara couldn't accept defeat. Jealousy hardened in her like stone. One evening, when the practice rooms were dark and empty, Clara slipped inside Mila's space. She opened the violin case slowly, silently, and loosened the bridge just enough to make the sound collapse when played. She left without a trace. The next morning, Mila arrived early for rehearsal. She placed her violin beneath her chin and played the first note. It cracked sharply like glass breaking in a quiet church. Pain flashed across her face. Something was wrong. She checked the strings, the pegs, the bow. Her heart raced as she noticed the loosened bridge, gently disturbed, intentional. Someone did this. She sat on the bench, breath trembling, eyes stinging. For a moment, doubt wrapped around her like winter wind. Maybe I don't belong here. Maybe they want me to fall. Maybe I should quit before I embarrass myself. But then she remembered the street lights. The plaza, the hunger, the applause, her mother. She stood, spine straight, resolve burning in her chest. No sabotage would silence her. She carried the violin to the repair room and waited, tapping her foot nervously as the luthier adjusted the bridge with careful hands. This instrument is old, he said, but strong like its owner. What? Mila smiled, small but fierce. Later that afternoon, with her violin restored, she walked to the stage for her final rehearsal. The hall was empty except for one person sitting quietly in the front row, Rashid. He had come to watch not because she needed guidance but because she deserved presence. When she finished, he stood and clapped slowly, warmly. "You are ready," he said. Mila exhaled with trembling relief. "The concert is tomorrow," she whispered. He nodded. "And tomorrow you will not play for food," he said. "You will play for the world." She pressed the violin gently to her heart. She wasn't that hungry child anymore. She was something more. A story waiting to be heard. The night of the winter concert arrived like a scene from a dream she once thought she would never reach. Snowflakes drifted through the air outside the academy like tiny white feathers, soft and silent. Inside, the hall glowed with warm golden lights. Hundreds of guests arrived in elegant clothing: musicians, critics, famous violinists, even newspaper reporters. Mila stood backstage with her violin in hand, wearing a simple white dress the academy gifted her, not fancy, not jeweled, just pure like her music. Her heartbeat echoed louder than the applause coming from the audience beyond the curtain. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, not a hungry girl in worn clothes, but a young musician with steady eyes and a dream finally within reach. Rashid arrived moments later. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder just like he did on the plaza's stone floor many weeks ago. "You are ready," he said. Mila nodded, though her stomach twisted with nerves. "I'm scared," she whispered. Rashid smiled softly. "Good," he said. "Only those who care deeply feel fear." His words warmed her like sunlight. The stage manager called her name. Mila inhaled once deeply, fully, then walked out. The audience turned, dozens of eyes. Dozens of expectations, dozens of opinions waiting to judge her. Front row seats gleamed with wealthy patrons. Cameras were ready. Critics sharpened their pens mentally. At the edge of the stage, Clara sat among the other musicians, jaw stiff, eyes burning with envy and regret. Mila raised her violin. The hall went silent. She closed her eyes not to escape but to remember. She remembered empty nights under city lamps. She remembered shaking hands asking for food. She remembered laughter thrown at her like stones. She remembered her mother's soft voice guiding every note. And then she played. Her first note was like breath after drowning, long, full, alive. The second note rose higher, bright as sunlight breaking through clouds. The third note trembled with old pain but matured into strength. The hall listened. Critics lowered their pens. Students forgot to blink. Even Clara froze, bitterness melting slowly into reluctant awe. Mila's bow danced like light, fast, emotional, unstoppable. The sound filled the hall like fire warming a frozen room. Every part of her story flowed through the strings. The hunger, the humiliation, the hope, the fight. People leaned forward unconsciously, drawn by something they could not define, only feel. When she reached the final section, Mila didn't just play. She soared. The notes flew across the room like wings breaking free. Her fingers moved faster than fear, faster than doubt, faster than every cold night she ever survived. She played with hunger still inside her, but now it was hunger for greatness, not bread. Her last note rang across the hall like pure silver, echoing into eternity. Silence. A full second, 2 seconds, 3, then a storm. The audience rose to their feet. Applause exploded like fireworks. People cheered her name, some cried openly, others clapped until their hands turned red. Reporters stood, musicians bowed their heads in respect. Clara's expression crumbled, jealousy replaced with something quieter, softer, recognition. She whispered, barely audible, she deserved it. Mila stood on stage, trembling, tears falling fast, not from pain this time, but from victory. She bowed slowly as the applause continued, washing her like warm rain. When she stepped off stage, Rashid was waiting, eyes shining with pride so deep it softened the air around him. "You are not the girl who asked to perform for food," he said gently. She raised her head, breathing hard, chest full with overwhelming emotion. "No," she answered softly. "I am a violinist." He nodded, proud, fulfilled. "A genius," he corrected. Mila smiled wide, bright, free. Her life changed from that night forward. She was offered recordings, concert tour, interviews. Newspapers printed her story, from hunger to standing ovations. Music schools requested her as a soloist. Audiences came from far away just to hear her play the sound of survival, of heart, of truth. And every time she lifted her violin, she remembered where it started: a street, a sandwich, a man who listened, and a child who refused to give up. She played not for food anymore. She played for souls, and the world listened. Played for souls, and the world listened.